I'm Madeline Wolski. I'm the business librarian here at Champaign Public Library. So Crafty Adults is a series that we host monthly. Each session focuses on a different creative project that can usually be completed within an hour. Today we have the amazing Laura Rice to teach us how to sew. So she is a fantastic librarian and colleague of mine in the Adult Services Department and possibly the craftiest person you might meet. So before we get started with the webinar, we have a few housekeeping items.
So I am excited. Today we're going to be sewing. We're just going to hop right into our project. As you can see behind me, I've got my workstation set out here. So I'm going to transition here to my workstation. And give me just a second to get my microphone plugged in here. All right. Are you guys able to hear me?
You are crystal clear.
Okay, wonderful. So welcome everybody to our hand sewing class. I wanted to kind of come up with a project that would translate for people who have maybe a little knowledge of sewing and for those who have absolutely no knowledge of hand sewing. So if you have a kit from the library, I'm going to go over some of the supplies that you should have in your kit. If you are joining us and you don't have a kit from the library, you can gather things that are similar to this. But I do want to go over some of the basic supplies that you should have as we get started. All right, so you should have a selection of pins as well as a tapestry needle. So we are using a tapestry needle today, and a tapestry needle is similar to a regular needle, except that the eye, I'm going to try to practice focusing this camera a little bit differently this evening. So the eye of the needle is larger than in a regular needle. So I'm going to grab a regular needle here. And you're hardly even going to be able to see the eye of the needle. It's right up top here. Let me see if I can get it a little closer. Anyway, so we're going to be using yarn this evening to sew rather than what you might be thinking, which is just a basic spool of thread. And there's a couple different reasons for that. It's going to be really hard to show on camera. The thread, it's, as you can see, you're already losing it here when it comes off the spool. So we're going to be using tapestry yarn to work on our project this evening. Now, if you're working from home and you've gathered your own supplies, don't worry if you're using a needle and thread, like a regular spool of thread, you're going to be able to do the project no problem. This is just a little bit easier for folks to use if you're just starting out, because you're going to actually be able to see your stitches. So tapestry yarn is one of the other things that you'll need. Straight pins, so you all should have a variety of different straight pins. If you don't have them, it's not going to be essential to our project this evening, but it will be helpful. So, other thing you should have, if you have a kit, you will have 4 randomly selected squares of fabric. Now, these squares of fabric are about 10 by 10 inches. Some are a little smaller, some are a little bit bigger. And we are going to join these together to make a nice little patch or a coaster. Will be our project for this evening. So you want to have a stack of fabric. Other things you want to have a button. So I've got this gigantic button that I'm going to be demonstrating with this evening. Also some rickrack. If you've got a kit, you've got some of this inside, or some ribbon. Now I've got a couple pieces of kind of like thicker ribbon here. And I think everyone has some of this too. Now this is piping, and all that piping is a piece of fabric folded in half, and inside it has a cord. And it creates this kind of 3-dimensional raised edge. Piping is really fun to use in sewing projects. Let's see here, scissors. You need some scissors. I have fabric scissors. You do not have to have fabric scissors, but I will recommend that you make sure the scissors you have are pretty sharp. Cutting fabric is a lot different than cutting paper, so the sharpness of your scissors really matters. Let's see. optional if you have an iron. It's best when you're sewing to make sure you iron your fabric flat so that you get a nice clean edge and you can really see how the fabric is going to lay. If you're sewing and you have some wrinkles, it will show in your final project. So I recommend ironing your fabric. I have an iron behind me and I'm going to go ahead and actually turn it on so that I can get this fabric ironed. And how's everybody doing out there? I would love if you could reply in the chat if you are a first-time sewer or if you're coming to brush up. Let us know kind of what your level of expertise is with sewing.
Laura, I have a question.
Yeah.
So is piping similar to binding that you would use as for quilting?
Yeah, so it's like the same as what is that called? The yeah, I guess it is called binding. Yeah, it's basically just that with a cord inside. So a lot of times it's like a cotton cord and you could use literally any size depending on how thick you want the piping to be.
Oh, nice. And
so you can make it.
Oh, nice. And Anna chimed in with a bias tape.
Thank you, bias tape.
Yes.
Thank you, thank you. I was like, it's another B word, but I can't remember what it is. So now that we've kind of gone through supplies you need, I'm going to show you some examples of what we're making tonight. So just to give you a little bit of background, I wanted to come up with a project that you could continue to work on after the class. I don't expect that we're all going to get these completed tonight, but I wanted you to have some motivation to finish. Sewing is one of those projects that it can be hard to just be like, I want to sew a straight stitch on this random piece of fabric. There's no motivation to finish or to keep working. So I think having a project in mind is really helpful when you're starting out with sewing. So what we're making this evening is, I'm calling it a coaster or a patch. So I've got some examples here using some different stitches of how we're going to make our project here. So you can see it's perfect size for a little coaster. Another example here where I've used just some, we're just going to be kind of compiling a little piece here with our base. We're going to have a square and then we're going to be able to cut material in some different shapes to kind of create a fun little layout here. So this one I used just some pom-pom trim as well. This fabric here, I actually made the shirt I'm wearing this evening, and this fabric is also in the shirt I'm wearing, which is kind of fun. Here's another kind of example of making something that looks a little bit more, you know, pictorial. So obviously I've got like a sun and some water in this image. And this is just kind of some random shapes thrown together. And to give you another little example, I want to show you my friend Jessie, who works at the Idea Store. She gave me permission to share some of her work with you all because I think her work is really going to inspire you and show you what you can really do with this project. So I'm old school. I could have shared my screen with you all, but I was like, no, I don't want to deal with that. I'm just printing off these pictures. So this is an image that she took of some of her patches where she used to cover up some holes in her denim, which I think is wonderful. Pop through here. This one is probably the most like what maybe you'll end up with at the end here. I'm going to flip it around. So all she's doing is taking scraps of fabric, cutting out some shapes, and making some really intentional stitches on here to kind of create a piece of art instead of just a plain piece of fabric. So here she's added like a little crown onto this bird that's printed on the fabric, and she's added these little like crescents around the bird. And I thought this image, I pulled these from her Instagram, and I will put a link to her Instagram in our chat if you all want to kind of check out some of her other artwork. We'll put it in by the end of the evening here. But this one, I thought this would really give you an idea of how to lay out some of the pieces of fabric that you have to create a nice little image here. Here's another one. You can see how in this one she went even like more intricate and has made Illinois and then added some actual embroidered flowers on here. So last one, I know I'm giving you a bunch of examples, hopefully some inspiration for you. This one was very special to me. I think she made it for a friend. I can't remember what she said, but these, I'm forgetting the name. I think they're called wedding ring quilts. Maybe someone will be able to tell me in the chat, or wedding band quilts, something along those lines. And she's actually taken this old piece of quilt and made a patch out of it. And I really like that because I recently got some pieces of fabric just like this. Different, I mean, obviously it's different fabrics, but very similar from my grandmother just last week. And these were actually made by her mother. So I just thought it was fun that I was going to be teaching this class and that Jessie shared this artwork that she made from some of these old quilting pieces, and I had just acquired some. So you can do tons of stuff with scraps of fabric, and that's what I would recommend if you're a beginning seamstress or seamster. All right, how we doing? I'll be honest, I can't see the chat the way that my table space is set up this evening. So Madeline, interrupt me whenever you want.
Absolutely. It looks like we mainly have a lot of newcomers coming into the class tonight. Lots of people excited to learn new skills. And we have just lots of praise for your immense skill. Thanks for sharing Jessie's examples and loving the collar.
Thank you so much. Yes, I wanted to wear it this evening and I couldn't make my outfit work today, but I ended up making a collar, like a tie-on collar that out of 2 pieces of this quilting fabric. So it was very fun. I plan to make some more. So before we even like dive in, I learned to sew. My mom taught me how to sew. When I was very young. It's one of the first gifts that I remember receiving was a bin full of my own sewing supplies. And I've been sewing in some capacity ever since. So it's something that I really connect with and really makes me happy. So I hope that some of you will find this to be a happy hobby as well. We're going to dive in though. So now that you've seen some examples, I hope that you're kind of looking at some of the fabric you have and thinking a little bit about what you might want to do. And I'm going to lay out some options for you. So we have about an hour that we're going to be working this evening. And like I said, you are not expected to finish this by any means. So take your time. You've got all the instructions to finish from home. I know you all are at home. I keep saying that as if you're here with me, but anyway, you can finish it later on if you want. But what I suggest doing first is ironing your fabric if it looks particularly wrinkly. Some of your fabric probably is going to be pretty flat, but in case it's not, I'm going to recommend throwing down a towel underneath before you iron. What I'm working on the surface is plastic, so it will kind of wrinkle up here if I put the iron directly on it. I usually will just iron directly on my fabric, but you can also open up the towel, which I'll just demonstrate this evening, and put your fabric in between your towel, and that will help if you've got any gunk on your iron or if you're worried about burning it. That will help. I'm usually not too concerned, but if you've attended any of my classes before, you know I kind of just go with the flow. So take this opportunity to do some ironing. Again, I think that was the only piece of mine that really needed it. Let's see here. Might do this one too. And I hate saying it because I like to skip as many steps as possible. But ironing is not a step that I recommend skipping. It makes your life so much easier if you just take the extra few minutes and make it happen. Sometimes you can even skip pinning if you've ironed really well. So if I want to skip a step, it's pinning over ironing, most definitely. All right. So looks pretty flat, looks pretty good. I'm going to throw out here to Madeline. Let me know if the focus starts to get a little bit funky with this. I am testing auto focusing since we're working with such a small subject matter. So if it starts to get blurry, just tell me.
Will do.
Okay. Okay, so first thing we're going to do, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an outline of how the class is going to be working here. Now that we've got our fabric ironed, what I want to show you is how to do a couple different types of stitches. Now in your outline, you have an idea of when you might use those stitches. I'm not a professional sewer by any means. These are just things that work for me and things that I've learned throughout the years. So what we're going to start with is called a running stitch. And when you're thinking about sewing, that is probably the first thing that will maybe come to mind. A running stitch is just that, it's running. So it's going, this is the front, you can see in this example, and this is the back. It looks exactly the same. You're just going over one piece of fabric, punching in, going under, and then kind of just doing a wave. And that'll make more sense once you start. We're also going to be learning how to do a blanket stitch. I think a blanket stitch is kind of fun. It looks a lot more impressive than it actually is to stitch. That I think you might enjoy using in your piece somewhere. We're also going to be learning how to do a back stitch. Now, a back stitch is a little bit more reinforced. So it's going to be something that you would use if you need a nice strong seam. We're also going to be learning a bonus stitch at the end of the evening if we have enough time, which is a chain stitch. A chain stitch is super impressive, I think, and it's really beautiful, and it's also not that hard. So the project that we're doing today is really just an example of kind of combining sewing and combining embroidery. So what I'm going to do is kind of lay out my fabric and think about what I might want to be the base. So the base of the fabric, let me pull out an example here. So in this particular piece, the yellow is my base. You are welcome to start actually assembling your design at this point if you're ready to, start making some cuts and doing that. You're also more than welcome to pick a piece that you don't want to use in your design and just practice doing some of the stitching along with me before actually stitching onto your piece. That is totally up to you, and I will let you choose accordingly. So I'm going to start just assembling my fabric here. I think I want to use just this plain green that I have. Woo, that's kind of a weird look. There we go. I want to use kind of a plain fabric as my background. So that's where I'm going to start. So I think what I want to do then is take my striped piece and maybe, let's see here. I might just come up the square, maybe about 3/4 of the way, just for fun. So that's how I'm gonna get started here. And I'm just gonna cut the stripes. A lot of you have this fabric in your kit, so a lot of people have this stripe, and I chose the stripe specifically because it's a little bit easier to cut a straight line because you have that guide. Another handy thing that I like to show people is if you don't have an iron and you're wanting to make a nice, like a crease in your fabric to give you an idea of where to cut, you can fold it, take your fingernail, and just run your fingernail across. You're going to be pressing pretty hard, but I have a nice crease. Of course, I did that in the navy blue, so you can't see it at all. I don't know if you can't see it on camera at all, but I have a nice crease that now I can see without having to be concerned that I'm cutting into my other piece of fabric. So now you guys can kind of see what I'm thinking here. I think I'm going to do this one. And I love this kind of floral fabric, so I'm going to do a strip of that. And again, I'm just going to start cutting. Now, if I wanted to do a circle, you can find literally any kind of like jar lid or something. You could flip it over. I think I will do a circle just to show you. Just like you're a kid, you know, making something and you want to trace, you know, a perfect circle on something or whatever. You're just gonna, they make markers and such that are water soluble or heat soluble, so they'll come off afterwards. I'm not using one of those. I'm just using a pen.
Is it going to be harder to sew circles than it would straight lines?
You know, I would say yes and no. If you're not don't have your heart set on getting a perfect circle and stitching around a perfect circle, then it's going to be easier because your eye's not going to be able to notice those little imperfections as much. If you're doing a straight line, your eye will easily notice if you're off. Yes and no.
Yeah, thank you.
I would recommend for folks starting out that, which I do appreciate that question, because I think when you're first starting out doing our first running stitch, I would recommend that you do a straight line or try to do a straight line just to get an idea. This might look totally whack, but this is, I kind of don't like that. It starts to look like a flag of some sort. So I might make some adjustments to my design here. Not sure. See, now I'm kind of rethinking what I'm doing here. I like these two together. So if you attended the collage class, this kind of similar, it's almost like collaging in a way. And it's the same, it's a similar concept where you kind of just add things and take them away, add, take away, figure out what works for you. For me, I think I'm just going to do one other like stripe here, just so I can start demonstrating a couple things to you, especially if you are waiting to start your design until after you do some practice stitching. So here, I just try to be careful and try to cut in as straight of a line as I can. You could use a ruler and trace, you know, trace a line and then cut it. That would work just fine as well. So here's what I'm doing, just a little layering. On my screen, it looks really dark. I don't know if it looks dark on yours or not.
It's like a good contrast dark, but not bad dark.
Okay. The green is much more emerald in real life. So anyway, so kind of here's how I'm going to start. And I want to also mention, if you take a look at your instruction packet, I do kind of map out some sewing things. We are going to leave what's called a seam allowance. So we're going to use about 1/2 inch on all sides of our design that will actually end up being folded behind. And that'll make more sense once we start working. When you're sewing, what you're wanting to do is be aware of where your raw edge is. So your raw edge is anywhere that you haven't sewn, so that the raw edge of the fabric is out. So when you're sewing, you want to, let me give you an example here with this one that you can see. So here's the raw edge of this example, and I have folded it over so that now when you look at it from the front, it looks nice and pretty and it's not fraying and you don't have these kind of uneven cuts. So when you're sewing, we typically refer to the front as the right side and the back as the wrong side. So you want to be mindful of that when you're stitching. You want to keep all your knots and all the kind of ugly stuff on the back on the wrong side. And you want the right side to be the front and to be the pretty side. You want that to be the your design side. So to get started, you are going to grab your tapestry needle. Again, if you have a kit, your needle should be to the side of your pins. And what we're going to do today is I have included in your kits tapestry yarn. So the reason I chose tapestry yarn is because it already is not that long. So it's already pre-cut. It's not like you're working from a ball of yarn. And it's a lot easier to start out using some tapestry yarn or some embroidery floss because you can actually see the stitches that you're making. Something that's a little bit more challenging with regular thread is that if you're using thread that matches the fabric, which is typically what you would do in a project so that you don't see the seam, you know, like on my shirt, they've used white thread and you can't see it on this white edge. So what we're going to be doing is taking a piece of tapestry yarn, any color you want. If you want it to be hidden, choose a color that's close to what you're working on. If you want it to be vibrant and you want to see it, choose something that contrasts with what you're working on. I recommend everybody choose contrasting colors since it will be easier to see, but if you want to choose something that matches, that is totally fine. And what we're going to do is separate out the yarn so that we just have one of the pieces. All of these yarns have 2 or 3 pieces of yarn kind of wrapped together. We want to just pull one out. So it's pretty simple to pull out. Just kind of separate out like this. It might get tight and it might be a little bit stuck. Just kind of straighten it out and keep moving so you get one of these strands. And let me know if you have any questions with that step. I know it seems counterintuitive to like rip apart the yarn, but it will look better. Okay, so we're going to thread the needle. And like I said in the beginning, we're using a tapestry needle. If you're using just a regular needle and thread, I'm going to demonstrate how you would thread that as well.
So we have a quick question, Laura.
Absolutely.
So about the thread, how long should it start? How long should it be?
If you are using, well, first, if you're using something from the kit, just the regular length that it is fine. If you're using something that you have, I always say about an arm's length is what you want to use. So you can't see me doing this because the camera angle, but when I'm measuring out an arm's length, I'm going to hold the end with my fingers and just outstretch my arm until I get to about my neck. And that's about as long of thread as you want to use.
Thank you.
Yeah. You can use longer, but I find, even though it's kind of annoying to continue to thread your needle, the longer your thread is, the more likely it is that you will get it in knots while you're sewing. So the shorter it is, the more likely you are not to get it all knotted up, and it just makes it a little bit easier overall, even though it seems like you're doing more work. And trust me, I will tell you from example, like, no. I've gotten my thread in so many knots before. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and thread our needle. I'm going to preface this by saying this is how I would thread the needle if you are using yarn or using a thicker thread. If you're using a spool of thread, I will go ahead and demonstrate that afterwards because it is slightly different. Now there is an example in your packet of both ways of how to thread the needle. So what I normally do is kind of take the edge of my yarn or my thread, and I'll usually kind of fold it in half a little, like fold it a little bit, just so I don't have this kind of crazy looking edge here. Threading a needle can be a little bit tedious and a little bit frustrating. So again, I'm going to test doing a little bit of focusing here and see if I can get it a little bit more clear. It's okay.
While you're threading, I'm going to share a comment. So Deborah shared that you can use beeswax on the thread to prevent knots.
That is wonderful. I did not know that. I love, see, and that's something that I love about having this class is so many of you are actually very crafty people as well. And so we can share a little bit of knowledge throughout the workshop. So please don't hesitate to chime in with stuff like that. I love to hear it. Okay, so we're gonna thread. So what you're gonna do, it's about as clear as I can get it, I think, is we're gonna take the edge here, this little folded bit, and we are going to push it through the eye of the needle. This can be a little challenging. It can be a little frustrating. So take your time, and you can see it's barely coming through. Barely coming through. So what I will normally do is just pull it through like that. Again, it's easier said than done. If you get frustrated trying to thread your needle, don't worry about it. We've all been there, and you'll be there again, and you're going to overcome it.
I know that with some sewing kits, they do include small needle threaders. So if it's a really big issue, that might be something to look into.
Yes, definitely. And there's definitely some tricks you can use. If you're really having some difficulty, you can also, I'll just give another example here. You can, where'd my scissors go? I have another pair. You can just trim the edge so you get a pretty clean edge, and then try putting it through the eye that way. You can see that was actually pretty simple. Sometimes the thread will separate and it gets everywhere and it's kind of frustrating. So that's going to be how you thread it through the eye of the needle. And then I'm going to do it again. It's kind of hard to demonstrate because you really are, I mean, it's such a small, fine motor skill. So for tonight, if you're using yarn or you're using embroidery floss, this is how I recommend that we start. You're going to pull the thread through maybe a few inches here, probably more like 5 or 6 inches. And then we're just going to come all the way down just with this one strand to the end. And we're going to tie an overhand knot. An overhand knot is pretty easy as far as knots go. You're going to make a loop just like this, almost like a little lasso. And then we're going to pull the tail through the loop. We're going to pull the tail through the loop, and then you're going to pull tight. And you've got your knot. Again, you're going to make a little lasso, little circle. Then you're going to tuck the tail in and pull it through the loop, just like that. Do we have a question come through? I feel like I might have seen one.
We have a funny joke that I'll share.
Okay, yay.
There's no I in needle.
We're talking about EYE.
Yes.
So how's everybody feeling with threading the needle and with their knot? I will demonstrate with thread in case any of you are working with just regular thread out there, but I do want to make sure everyone feels good with how they've got their needle threaded with the yarn for now. So let us know if you're good or if you have questions. And I'm going to take a quick break so I can have some water.
Looks like we're all good on the questions front.
Okay, fabulous. Let's start sewing, you guys. So if you're using a regular spool, the same thing would apply as far as an arm's length. So same thing, I kind of hold it and then pull so I get about an arm's length of thread, and usually I'll maybe unspool it just a little bit more. Cut it off. And then what I will do, where did my pin cushion go? I have this cute little pin cushion that you can slip on your wrist. Got a needle in here. This one is going to be a little bit challenging for me because it's got such a small eye, but I'm going to give it a go here. I am farsighted, so I have some difficulty with the threading of a needle sometimes. Oh gosh, that was so close. You know what I'm going to do instead, just because I don't want to take up all the time doing this? I'm just going to use my tapestry needle that has a pretty large eye so that it's a little easier. Way easier. All right, so the only difference with thread is that what you want to do, instead of just pulling the thread that you threaded through the needle, instead of just pulling that down a few inches, what you're going to do is match it with the base. So you're going to match it with the end, the opposite end of thread. And then what you're going to do is tie an overhand knot with that. Again, so hard to show on camera because of how thin the thread is, but you're going to do a loop and you're going to pull the tail through and create a knot that way. Now, the difference is we wanted 2 layers of our thread, which is typically what you're going to do when you're hand sewing, is you want 2 layers of thread. Now, with the yarn, we're just doing 1 because otherwise it's a little bit too thick to pull through the fabric comfortably. So that's why we're doing just 1.
So by 2 layers, we could say that that means it's double-stranded.
Double-stranded, exactly. Now I'm going to cut that and just remove it and put my other thread right back on.
And it's cool how it looks like the thickness of the yarn, it's really dependent on the weave of the fabric.
Yes, definitely. So I will say, I mean, as we're sewing, you'll kind of see what I mean here. Some of this fabric, the weave might be a little tight, so it might be a little bit tougher to pull through, and you'll see what I mean. I think even with that like slight hardship, I still think it's easier to explain and demonstrate using the yarn, especially for a first time sewer. So what we're going to do now, I'm just going to start with a basic running stitch. If this is the only stitch you learn tonight, it will do you just fine. You could do this entire project using just this stitch. You could do some mending projects just using this stitch. You don't have to learn anything else this evening as long as you can master the running stitch. So what I'm going to do here, I'm actually going to remove some pieces of my design right now and just focus on the one that's at the very bottom. So for me, that's going to be this chevron orange pattern here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull these off and set them aside for now. Again, I'm going to focus my camera a little bit. I was hoping that this green would be a little bit easier to see.
Without the other pattern, it actually is very teal at the moment. And then it looks like I'm going to message Catherine. I didn't lose any audio, but.
Okay. Yeah, if anybody has any technical difficulties, do not hesitate to let us know. So I'm gonna proceed with demoing, getting started, unless I hear that we are having some audio issues. You can always try to X out and rejoin if you're having issues. Your place will still be here. So, okay. So for a running stitch, I'm going to demonstrate on this green fabric because I think it's going to really pop and you're going to be able to see what I'm doing. So what you want to do is take your needle and your thread and pull. Let's see, you're going to flip over your fabric. Watch what I'm doing here. I'm not flipping my whole project over. What I'm doing is kind of holding the back side up, the wrong side, so that I can see what I'm doing. I'm going to get started here and just do a basic running stitch, not stitching this other piece of fabric down, just to demonstrate so that you can see clearly what I'm doing. So I'm going to push my needle up to the front of the fabric here from the back. And I'm going to pull, just gently pull until my knot hits that back side here.
And quick question, Laura, was that knot a single or a double knot?
You know what? This one was like a quadruple knot from from demoing. A single knot should be fine. Most of this fabric is woven fairly tight and the yarn's fairly thick, so it should be okay. But you could do a double knot. If you're sewing with regular thread, I almost always do a double knot or a triple knot because I'm paranoid. Okay, so what you're going to do now is take your needle and you're going to come back down from the front to the back, so from the right to the wrong, and you're going to come back down about 1/4 of an inch. You could make very large stitches if you'd like. That's kind of up to you, but I say 1/4 of an inch is about what you want. So you can see, now I'm going to push my needle back down and pull it through again. Just kind of gently pull it down. And you can see here, which I was hoping would happen. When I pull it tight, my fabric starts to pucker. And now my stitches disappeared and my fabric is kind of, there we go. My fabric is all wrinkled. You don't want to pull that tight. You want to then grab your fabric and pull the fabric tight so that your stitch kind of loosens up a little bit. So if you've done any other kind of like yarn crafting or anything like knit or crochet, your tension is a little bit, I mean, it can really make or break your project. If you're pulling too tight, it's going to be tough for your thread knot to end up ripping. So then what you're going to do from the back side, let's look at the back. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to go about 1/4 of an inch up and we're going to push our needle through to the front and pull it up. Just like that. Again, it's like you're pulling and then you're flattening out again. And now I've got a stitch on the back side. And you're just going to keep doing that. If you're doing a straight line, just try to keep it as straight as possible. I suggest doing this just a few times to get an idea, and then I'm going to show you a little cheat that you can do. But you're going to pull through. Again, kind of undo a little bit. There we go. And then come through the back to the front and pull tight. Again, not too tight. If it's too tight, just tug on your fabric to kind of flatten it out again. Go about 1/4 of an inch to even 1/2 inch if you want a bigger stitch. And pull through. And you can see we're starting to get a little bit of a line here. So something you might be thinking is like, okay, it seems weird that you have to keep flipping your fabric up and down when you're not really going to see the back. And that's where I'm going to show you a little cheat. Once your needle is up at the front, at the right side of your fabric. So here we go. My needle's up here. What you're going to do, it's easier for me to reposition it this way. So what you're going to do is go down about 1/4 of an inch. And then you can kind of see, you can kind of feel with your hand where your needle's at. Then you can bring it up just like that without flipping. You could go down and then you could come back up, almost like you're gathering these little puckers right on your needle. Down. And then come back up. It takes a little practice to be able to get it in a decent straight line. I am not a perfectionist when it comes to making things really, so I don't mind if my line is a little off because I saved some time here making the stitch this way. But you're going to pull through. My needle almost came unthreaded there. And as you can see, now I've made 3 stitches in the time, it would have taken me normally just to do 1 stitch. So that's a nice little time saver if you're wanting to stitch quickly. So again, you're going to come down, up, 1/4 of an inch, go down, 1/4 of an inch, come up, 1/4 of an inch, go down, 1/4 of an inch, come up. And then just pull tight. If you pull too tight, let me show you what happens here. Your whole thing is going to start to gather. Now, some people in a sewing project might want this. You might want to try to make a gather because you want a little bit of a ruffle. That's one way that you can accomplish it. I don't want that this evening, so I'm just going to go ahead and pull it again. And man, I pulled it a little bit too tight here. There we go. So let's say I'm done. Let's say this is the only stitch I'm doing and I'm done. I'm going to come back down to the bottom. And again, you don't need to do this. You can just follow along and watch me do this. You don't need to actually finish out your stitch now. If you're still working, go for it. Come to the back. And I'm going to show you how to tie a knot. So I've got a couple different options. You could just do an overhand knot again. So for that, I would make another loop. Whoops, make a loop and then pull my needle right through the loop and then pull tight. You can already see a knot forming here. The catch is you want it to be right up close to that base of that fabric right there. So what I do is kind of grab the knot with my finger and then pull tight. And I'll demonstrate that again here. Make a loop. Pull your needle through that loop until you kind of see a little bit of a knot forming. As you can see, I'm just guiding it. I'm guiding that knot right where I want it. Put your finger on top and pull. Another way you can make a knot is to actually slip through your last stitch, and I'll show you that method. Again, this is outlined in your instructions too, so if you miss it, that's okay. You can, this is the back side here. I'm going to slip my needle through my last stitch here. And this is how I would do it if you were using just regular thread. So we're kind of making another loop. And then what you're going to do is same thing. Pull the needle through the loop and pull tight. And that is another way to make a knot. Again, you're going through the last stitch. You're going to make a loop. And something you do want to be careful of, you're not just coming back through this way. You want to come around and come through that loop again. So hopefully that makes sense. You want to go make a loop around the loop. You're not just coming straight through the loop. Make a loop around the loop. It sounds insane. Okay, but now I'm knotted and I'm secure. So I'm just going to snip my thread about 1/2 inch. And that's good. I might have pulled a little bit too tight on mine. You can see it is kind of puckering a little bit. Now, if my iron was hot, I would probably just iron over this again real quick just to get it as flat as I can. I'm not going to be too concerned with that. But I just want to show you front and back look about the same. So now we're going to do a back stitch. So I want to show you a back stitch. Again, if you aren't ready to do a back stitch, that is totally fine. You can just watch me, or you can just work on a scrap piece of fabric to do the back stitch. So I'm going to thread my needle. A back stitch is something that you might do if you need to reinforce a seam that gets a lot of wear. And I'm going pretty quick through this now. I'm going to do my knot. I'm going to do my knot. And now I'm going to do a back stitch. So I'm going to come up through. I'm just going to make a line right next to it here. Again, I'm going to make a little knot on the back on the wrong side. I'm going to pull through here. And then I'm going to come about 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to go down from the right side to the wrong side. And then I'm going to come back up about 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to pull tight, but not too tight. And instead of going forward, I'm going to go backwards. So now I'm going to make a back stitch. So I'm going to come right back down the front of this stitch here. Now, it looks like a nice fluid straight line. So I'm going to come up from the back side. So you can see here from the back side, about 1/4 of an inch from the top of the last stitch. I'm going to pull tight, but not too tight. And then I'm going to go right back down to the base of the first one. And now, again, I've got a nice straight line. I'm going to pull up my instructions just to show you because it's very easy, or it's much easier. I wouldn't say very easy, but much easier to understand if you can kind of use the alphabet with this. So stitch A, stitch B, stitch C. If you get confused, refer back to this, and this will kind of help you understand where your needle is coming up each time. So again, I'm on the wrong side now, and I want to come up about 1/4 of an inch. Like that. Pull tight, but not too tight. And you're going to come right back down at the top of your last stitch, just like that, right through the same hole. And that's going to give you a nice straight, I mean, if you can see, you got to practice. My line's not super straight, but it looks okay. I could get it straightened out here if I kept working. I'm going to do it one more time. So from the back, you're going to come up about 1/4 of an inch. I'm starting to start to veer right is what it looks like I'm doing here. And you're going to put your needle right back down into the top of the first stitch. You see that here, or top of your last stitch, sorry. And then you're just going to pull. So I want you, if you've done a back stitch with me, and if you don't, whenever you get it completed, I want you to try this with me. So if you pull on your straight stitch or your running stitch, there's a little give. If you pull on either side of a back stitch, there is not as much give. So this is a stronger stitch because you're actually stitching more. And it's going to be something that I would recommend using if you need to mend something, or you want something that's going to be have some heavy traffic on it. A back stitch is a nice stitch to use because it's not going to move around as much and have as much, not elasticity, but kind of. Depending on your thread, they can be a little stretchy. Okay. How's everybody feeling so far with our first 2 stitches? It's actually taken a little longer than I anticipated. I can't believe it's almost 8 o'clock. You want me to go ahead and move on to a blanket stitch and a chain stitch, or would you like me? Go ahead. Yeah, everybody go ahead, and I'd love to hear your input. Would you like me to go ahead and demo how to do the blanket stitch and then the chain stitch, or would you like me to go ahead and walk you through kind of assembling your project? Again, you're probably going to assemble your project without me on your own time. So just let me know which one you'd prefer.
It looks like we have 2 who would like to learn how to do the stitches. So okay. Yes to blanket, then stitch.
Okay. Thank you both for letting us know here. Okay, so what we're going to do now is a blanket stitch. So I'm just going to knot this one real quick, and I want to look around my fabric here. I might demonstrate using a different fabric. I think I'm going to demonstrate using this because I might focus a little better. For the blanket stitch, I'm going to use a thicker piece of yarn just to demonstrate. I think it'll be a little easier for you to see. Now a blanket stitch is one I've done, whoops, on this piece here. So what I like to use it for sometimes, it works really nice for felt. So if you're doing a felt project for, I don't know what, but a blanket stitch looks so nice on a piece of felt. And felt is wonderful to use if you are a beginning sewer because it doesn't fray like regular fabric will. So what we're going to do is make a stitch that has this nice little edging. And I will be honest with you, I have to look at the instructions when I'm doing this because I will confuse myself with a blanket stitch. I can do it like if I don't have to talk you through what I'm doing, but if I have to talk you through it, I start to get all confused. And story of my life is that I lose my needles because you see here I have a pin cushion on my wrist where I should have just placed my needle, and instead I threw it on the table. It's a very bad habit. Okay, so a tapestry needle is wonderful because the eye is larger, so you can use thicker fibers. So I'm just going to pull all 3 strands through the eye of this needle here. Oh my, we're knotting up here. Let's try that again. If you are not ready to practice a blanket stitch with me, that's cool. You can just keep working on whatever you're working on. We are recording this webinar, so if you would like to go back and watch, that's cool too. We'll post it on our YouTube channel and you will get an email whenever we get that going. I've been trying to get them up at least by the following week, but some days, some weeks it happens, some weeks it doesn't. Okay, I'm just going to use 2 strands because that's all I could get, and I don't want to waste all your time trying to thread my needle here.
While you're threading, we have someone who can definitely relate with you. They set needles on their lap all the time and have to stand up and listen for them to hit the floor. Bad habits are hard to break.
Oh my gosh, aren't they? I don't even want to tell you how many times I've stepped on a straight pin. It's very painful and I don't like reliving those experiences. So same thing, we're going to knot, we're going to overhand knot. I'm going to move quickly through that. All right, so for a blanket stitch, what you want to do is I'm going to think about how I'm going to position my fabric here. I think just this way will work. You're going to pop your needle through the back side, through the wrong side. And you're going to pull it so that your knot is snug up against your fabric. When you start a blanket stitch, what you're going to do is start by, we want to create just a plain stitch just like this. So what you'll do is come right back through around that same hole. Does that everybody see how I'm doing that here? Again, you got an image on the packet that has an example, so if you do get lost, no worries. So we're going to pull so we have a nice little loop almost around. And you guys see how we've done that. And now what I'm going to do with this is kind of pull the loop out just a little bit so that I can, switching to the other hand just for a second, I'm going to actually put my needle through the loop here and kind of pull. Oop, I've gone through the yarn. Go through both loops. Oh my gosh, got thread everywhere. Okay, so I want to actually go through the loop and come over here. Okay, So as you can see, we've done that. And then what we're going to do is come back to the wrong side, and you're going to come up about, I don't know, maybe 1/4 to 1/2 inch in that same line here. Pull your needle up. Okay, we're getting a little loop. Now, right before we get to the loop, you're going to put your needle through the loop like this, and you're going to pull tight. Now, the first one always looks a little funky. You kind of have to mess with it a little bit. But that's all you're going to do through the entire process. You're going to put your needle on the back side, and you're going to pull it through. And before you pull it tight, what you do is you just stick your needle through the loop. So it looks a lot more impressive than it really is. You're going to pull tight. Again, go ahead.
Does it matter which way you thread the needle through that loop when you pull it through? Because
you want, so if you're, I'm stitching from left to right for this piece. So if you're stitching left to right, you're going to want to head the direction. You want to go through the loop in the direction that you're stitching. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
The blanket stitch is one of those, as you can see, it's kind of, I'm having some issues with my first one here. Just I think it's actually because of the yarn. I think I need to pull it a little tighter. This works really well for edging. There we go. That's starting to look a little bit better. You see that here, how I've kind of folded the fabric down. So again, we're going, oops, where are we at? Pulled a little too tight there. Okay, so now I'm coming up for my loop. And I'm gonna go, if you're stitching from right to, or from left to right, you're gonna go into the loop from the left side, and you're gonna pull through. And you're starting to get a nice little, I messed up something here. Give me just a second. I'm gonna show you this. If you need to undo because you messed up a stitch, it's pretty easy. You are going to, I think I was talking and doing this at the same time, and I got myself all turned around. You're going to take the yarn off your needle or the thread, and I'm going to just kind of reverse what I've just done. So I'm going to pull my last stitch out. You can see again, if you're using a lot of yarn or a lot of thread, this is where you can start to get some major knots, and it can be a little frustrating. So even if you've been sewing for a while, you will still make mistakes, and you're still going to have to take your work out and redo it. And that is just the fact of crafting. So let me come back here, pull through. I don't love making mistakes like that in a workshop, but at the same time, it helps kind of demonstrate how you can fix those mistakes. So here we go. I'm back up just to my second stitch here. How's everybody feeling about blanket stitch? I think it might make a little more sense once you look at the drawing and practice it yourself a little bit. Rethread. Okay. Now I'm going to come back up. You can see, because we're using a thicker needle, you can kind of see the holes in this fabric. Okay. Here we go. Again, it can be a little tough to get your tension right with the blanket stitch and just with sewing in general. So be patient, give yourself a little, just a little grace when it comes to getting started on something if you haven't ever done it before. Again, we're going through the loop and pulling tight-ish. And you can see I'm kind of getting that nice edge coming up here. Oop, started going through the wrong side. You want to come up from the back. And pull through. Come through the loop. All right, and you can see I'm getting a nice little edge here. So I used the blanket stitch on this example just for fun, kind of as I joined these two pieces of fabric together. It's not perfect, of course, but it gives you a little bit of an idea of how you could also incorporate that stitch not on the edge, but just on the edge of another piece of fabric. Okay. I'm going to demonstrate the chain stitch now. To finish off a blanket stitch, I would recommend just doing popping through your last stitch with a loop, just like this. Getting a nice little loop ready, coming in through the back, just like you did with the other stitch, and pull tight. Now you got a nice little knot. Okay. I'm going to show you a chain stitch. Chain stitch is more of like an embroidery stitch. You're probably not really going to use it with mending anything, but you might use it for beautifying something. I really like the chain stitch. But for that one, let's see. I think I'm going to come back to, yeah, that looks okay. This to demo the chain stitch. So what you will do, again, wrong side, just come up wherever you want it. So I'm going to do this here. Ooh, that weaves a little tighter. So I'm going to pull through here. Again, wrong side, right side. I need to get a drink of water here. Anybody have any questions right now?
We did have a question that was over the back stitch, and I think it'd be good to maybe grab the instructions, but for those back stitch instructions, after going up at D, do you go down on C?
Let me take a look. Okay, when you say that again.
When you go up at D, do you go down on C?
Correct, yes. That is what you're going to want to do.
Well, thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome. Okay, let's do our fun little chain stitch. Chain stitch is one of those that's impressive, but it is not that hard. So come up from the back side to the front side, right to wrong, or wrong to right. And what we're going to do is make a little loop. So what I'm going to do is stitch right back down. So if you're looking at the instructions, I'm going to go from A, B is your loop, and then I'm going to stitch right through that same hole. Oh, geez, I stitched through my knot. That's not great. Oh, boy.
A zing.
Yep. Don't worry, we're here till 8:30, you guys. You got 20 more minutes of that. Okay, anyway, you're going to make a little loop. So think about this. You want your loop to be as big as you want your chain. So you could make a huge chain if you wanted. I don't want that. I want a little smaller. I'm going to do this one a little bit larger than I maybe normally would just for demo purposes. But as you can see now, I've got a little loop. So what I want to do now is come back up through the loop. So I'm going to come back up. So my C stitch is coming up right. Oh, I'm going to try to focus this again here. Right through the loop. And you're going to pull. You don't want to pull too tight because you're going to pull your loop too tight. So it takes a little practice to get your tension right. So see, I got my loop. And then I'm going to go right back down into that same hole again and create another loop.
So we're making sure the loop stays and isn't pulled through.
Exactly. You want that loop to stick around because it's going to become your chain. So here I've got my second loop. So again, I'm just going to come up through. You're probably about another 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit longer. And then I'm going to come through the loop. Is that easier to see? I don't know. Pull through, not too tight. And then I'm going to come right back down into that same spot, that same stitch to make a chain. So you can see once you get going, it's going to look real nice. And I will pull out an example here to show you where I used the chain stitch. I'd love to hear, are you all actually working on your patch or coaster, or are you just doing what I'm doing here, which is kind of just practicing on some fabric? We're getting around to that point about 8:15, so maybe in about 10 minutes we can share screens at the end if you all have a project you'd like to share. If you don't, that's totally cool, but go ahead and let us know in the chat if you're working on just some practice or if you're working on the actual coaster project. And you can let us know right now if you'd like to share your project, just so we get an idea of how many people are interested.
So it looks like we have Rita who's practicing on fabric.
Okay.
And then Rita shared that theirs is going to be way too big for a coaster. Maybe like it could be a coaster for a stein or something excessively large, a bowl coaster.
Who doesn't need a good bowl coaster these days? Am I right? Another thing I want you to remember is, sorry to reach over like this, but I know I'm like a huge Jessie fan, so I hope she sees this later and really understands, but I printed off pictures from her Instagram. That's how famous she is. But I love this idea of using it to patch some denim. I think it's great. You could make it a decorative patch. You could fix one of the questions that we got asked, and I do want to address some of the questions that people asked when they registered. One of the questions was fixing ripped denim. Ripped denim, I recommend just patching it. And so as you can see, what she did is used a blanket stitch to sew her patch onto her denim. It looks marvelous. I don't know if she did this functionally or for beautification purposes. To me, it looks like a little bit of both. But she has also, I learned about this from her, a hashtag if you want to look on Instagram or YouTube or anything, called Visible Mending. So it's about mending garments so that you can see it. It is a way to showcase that you can reuse, you can repurpose. You don't have to throw something away because it has a hole in it.
So we have a question about the blanket stitch.
Let's hear it.
Not the blanket, the chain stitch, excuse me. So after coming up at A and then down again on A, my stitch undoes itself. What am I doing wrong?
Pulling too tight. So you want to keep that loop. I'm just going to explain here again. I'm going to come up and do one. So when you're coming up at A, again, I'm doing this as an example, not because, okay, pretend like this other chain doesn't exist. So if you're coming up at A, and then coming back down at A, again, right? So you're pulling back through. I'm going to demonstrate probably what is happening. Probably, can I keep going through my knot? If you pulled all the way through, goodbye, no more stitch. If you do not pull all the way through, come back here. So we're at A again, and then we're going right back down to A. Keep that loop. So you see here how the loop's pretty big. might be helpful just to stick your finger and pull the loop tight around your finger, especially as a practice, just so you can kind of see. You want to keep that. And then you're going to start again. And you're going to come back up in the middle here. You see where my stitch is. Pull up again, pull. I say pull tight, but not too tight. Once you get your first chain, you can pull fairly tight. And as you can see, it's going to hold the loop now. Now my loop's not going anywhere. I have a stitch to hold it down. All I can see is my cat is way too interested, and I understand completely.
Yes, so using the finger was very helpful. And yeah, we had someone else comment that their cat is way too interested in the yarn. So they're just very appreciative that we're going to be posting the recording for future reference.
Good. I have cats, so I very much understand. I call them my studio assistants, and usually they are not helpful at all. They're a real handful. So that's how to fix your chain stitch so it doesn't disappear on you. Makes total sense that happened, just because it's almost like it's counterintuitive to come back through a stitch you just stitched. And I'm going to undo these here. For to finish off a chain stitch, all you would end up doing, let me get this undone here. And never be ashamed of having to undo sewing. I was actually working on a sewing project this morning, and on a machine, but still I had to take the whole thing apart twice. The right and wrong side can really cause you issues if you...
So here's a question someone had earlier. Does two wrong sides make a right?
You all are wonderful. I would say that's up to your interpretation. I don't want to tell you.
Wait, that's up to yarn interpretation? That's pretty bad.
I think Madeline and I have really had a day by our puns. Okay, let me show you. I just accidentally took out another chain link. I didn't mean to, but anyway, we're just going to roll with it. If you wanted to finish up your chain, all you would do, which is pretty cool, is come up like you were going to make another one. Okay, and then we're just going to do one running stitch to kind of tack it down. So all I'm going to do here is just come right back through. I'm going to pull it through the back. And that has tacked my chain down. I know this doesn't look very impressive since it's just the two stitches, but then you could come flip it around and do just a regular old overhand knot. Holding down with your finger is super helpful if you're trying to... I had a lot of troubles when I first started getting the knot really close to the fabric. I couldn't figure out how to do it. And one knot should be good, and I'm just going to cut my tail and call that a beautiful chain stitch. You can see here I did a chain stitch on the edge of this fabric here just to add some interest. Again, running stitch and back stitch are what you'll probably use more for mending purposes. If you were wanting to join two pieces of fabric together to make what's called a seam, so anything you're sewing here is called a seam, what you would do, and this is where right and wrong sides really come in handy, knowing that term, is if you are, let's see here, wanting to, I'm just going to use this as an example real quick, stitch these two pieces of fabric together like quilting. What you will do is take this is the right side, this is the right side. I'm going to put them together. This is where your pins come in handy. You're going to grab your pins. And you're going to just pin those right sides together. I'm just going to use a couple because I'm going to move through this very quickly since we're just about at our time. How are we doing? Is anybody interested in sharing this evening, or are we all just kind of practicing?
We had someone who was interested in sharing, and I have their name, so I'll be making them a panelist once we start doing that. But we have one more question.
Let's hear it.
Would a blanket stitch work to anchor the edge of a patch on the underlying fabric, or should the blanket stitch be worked separately on the patch before sewing them together?
If it were me, it depends. If you're going to put the patch on like a knee area, honestly, because you get a lot of, you know, there's a lot of tension there because you're bending your knee. I would do a regular stitch first and stitch, I think I would do a blanket stitch first actually around the patch and then stitch the patch to whatever piece, whatever you're stitching it to. Is how I would do it, just because I'd really want to make sure that was reinforced. You can see on this one, I did like even 2 blanket stitches on the edge just for fun. But that's how I would personally approach it. Then you could just do like a little tack kind of on either on top or maybe on either, you know, you could tack it on the in-between of the blanket stitch and create almost a second stitch. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Oh, so another question. What is the item on Laura's wrist called? Is that like a pin cushion?
Yes, pin cushion. It's a pin cushion that's, I didn't make this, but I thrifted it, somebody did. And they just made an elastic armband. They sewed it onto the back so that they're always wearing it, which I love. Okay, I'm going to demo this real quick just so you can see, because we are getting to our time. I didn't get to go over sewing on a button, which was one of the questions that we got, and it is in the packet. I apologize. I kind of thought this would move a little bit quicker, but that's usually just the nature with teaching. You don't know. It's kind of hard to judge sometimes how much you can fit in one class. Okay, if you wanted to stitch 2 pieces of fabric together like this, I'm going to do a running stitch. I'm going to do it real fast, and I am not going to be too precise about it. As you can see, I'm doing it kind of the cheat way where I'm almost just accordioning everything onto my needle. And I'm going to pull through. All right. Any other questions coming through this evening before we wrap up?
Not at the moment, but after you're done displaying that, I'm going to make Ree a panelist so
Wonderful.
they can share their screen.
Wonderful. So here's joining 2 pieces of fabric together. It's something I wanted to demo, even though I didn't include it in the information, because I think this is probably something that you might wonder. So I'm going to knot. So I've done a running stitch. I've put my 2 right sides together. Whoop, I'm trying to move too quickly here with my knot. Okay. And now you can see when I open it, you don't see that raw edge. I've just got my nice straight line. And so here, if you were quilting, is where I would maybe iron right now just to get everything nice and flat. So in these pieces, that's what they've done is, so that's what she did, was stitch these pieces of fabric together to create this lovely strip here. So that'll give you just a little bit of an idea if you wanted to do that. Real quick, I want to address a couple of the questions that we got. If someone wanted to know how to repair a sock, if you're talking just a hole in a sock, I would just use the running stitch to you want to gather all the fabric and just continue to do a running stitch over and over to kind of pull all the fabric together until you get a nice until you close it up. I don't know if that makes sense, but a running stitch is what I would use. You can practice and get a little bit of an idea. Someone else asked how to sew patches on denim. That we kind of covered. Another question we got was how to repair damaged knitted or like crochet fabric. For that, I'm going to suggest that you reach out to Brigitte Pika at Close Knit. We had her for our knit crochet class, and she is an absolute master. So I'm going to recommend, let me get her link to her website and just throw it in the chat here. I would recommend contacting her to set up a time to come in. She would be your expert. There's too many variables to really explain the best way to do that one.
I will say we recently got a lot of, or at least within the past couple months, a lot of really cool mending books in, and I'm also a big fan of visible mending. I think it's a very awesome trend. So check out what resources we have in the catalog.
Please, yes, I'm so glad you mentioned that. The other question that we got was how to sew on a button, and I have that in the instructions, so I'm just going to call that good enough. If I have time, what I will do is film a quick little how to sew on a button and tack it on to this video when it's posted on YouTube. I'll go ahead and just plan on doing that so you can see me actually do that, even though we didn't get to it this evening. And I think that's it. That's all the questions that we had posed before the class. So I hope this was fun for you guys. I'd love to, since I know maybe a lot of you didn't actually create a complete project, I'd love if you do to share it on our Instagram or share it with us on Instagram or Facebook. I'd love to be able to see what project you ended up making, or if you do any visible mending of your own. Again, it's just like a very basic sewing class. Sewing is, I mean, I'm still learning, and I've been doing this since I was like, I don't know, maybe 10 years old. So it takes practice, and it's something that you can pretty much always find new cool tools or concepts to further your sewing skills. So anywho, I'm gonna pop back over here. Does anybody have any other questions before I'm gonna come back and get rid of my workstation here? Ooh, Ree's joining.
Yeah, so
Let's
Reese, I
see.
just turned on your video, so why don't you show us what you have? So you're still muted. You're welcome to stay muted if you would like. Here, I'm gonna make this the highlight. Very nice. Already has the pin at the buttons on as well.
I absolutely love that.
That's fantastic, Ree.
It's not actually done. It's just pinned together.
I still think it's fantastic though.
Yeah, so what Ree showed too is a great example of her design is all pinned to her base fabric so that she can set it down, she can move it around a bit, and she doesn't have to worry about the design falling apart or anything. So that's the intent with the straight pins, is that you're able to pin something down, test it out, see if you like it before you actually stitch it. I think I'm spotlit now, so no one else, I don't know if everyone else can see, but Ree attended our preserved leaf mobile class that we did. Yes.
I was wondering.
Everyone, look at that masterpiece.
That's awesome.
I love it. We did preserved leaf mobiles in October, September? I can't remember. I don't know. What is time?
I think
it could have been 3 years ago. I don't know.
I think it was September.
Okay. That's so cool. Thank you for sharing that. I think some of you might have been in our Leaf Mobile class, so look at Ree as some inspiration there. Let's see here. Just looking through the chat since I haven't been able to see anything. And
would anyone else like to be made a panelist and share their screen? No pressure.
let us know. Anybody have any last minute questions to ask either myself or Madeline about sewing or Crafty Adults or library related anything? We're happy to answer your questions. Take another drink here. I do so much talking when I do these that I come home and I'm just like, whew. Thank you for coming, Rita. Thanks for coming, Barbara. Maureen, thank you. Ree says, I don't have a question, but I have a comment. When my cats are hindering, it's still helpful because it makes me laugh. Yes, that's why we keep them, right?
I will say cats, I think, are much better crafters than dogs.
Much better. You are so right. They are far superior when it comes to crafting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you all for attending. I hope this kind of helped you get a little bit of an idea of how to start sewing, hand sewing that is, and hopefully you'll join the visible mending train. I think it's spectacular. I did want to show you, I made this shirt that I'm wearing today. These are actually pillowcases. So I just kind of took some scrap fabric and turned these crazy arms into pillowcases into arms. So anyway, I like to get a little bit crazy with my sewing projects. Rita asks, what is visible mending? So visible mending is mending something, so repairing it, but so that you can see it. So instead of trying to hide it, so instead of maybe hiding my seam here, like you can't see it, it's about making it so that you can see the stitches and you can tell that I fixed this thing, and kind of made it a little bit more artful, and I'm like wearing it as a badge of honor.
See what I'm looking at. So this is just our catalog. I just searched visible mending and you can see a lot of our new items that came in. I loved Joyful Mending. So we have it as an electronic resource and as a physical book. And Joyful Mending does go into the knitted sock repair. I'm now waiting for a wooden mushroom so I can repair my own socks. Mending matters, specifically denim, but it's just a really great movement that focuses on sustainability. It helps you become more aware of what exactly the impact of the fashion industry has on our environment. It's depressing, but what a great way to express your creativity, because like the visible mending, it's not just here's a hole with another hole on it, it's here's a hole but I also embroidered around it. I mean, I think of Jessie's patches that Laura shared on the knees. I mean, that's a work of art in itself.
Definitely. Yes, thank you so much for sharing that, Madeline. Let's see here. Yes, I'm just popping through the chat here. I think we've got everything mostly answered. Cool. Yeah, if you ever have any questions, like if you have sewing questions after, you know, you've been working for a little bit, you can, I mean, feel free to reach out to the library where we do more than just, you know, book related things. I mean, we're here for you. If you have questions, I'm always happy to answer. You can always reach out to the library, librarian at champaign.org. You can find our contact information on our website. Our next, let me think about this. Our next Crafty Adults event will be in, what month are we in now? We're in March, so it's in April. April I should look at a calendar so I know. April the 14th. Registration for that will open on Thursday, April 1st at 9 a.m. We're not joking around. We're still going to have our registration open on the 1st. And that is for DIY beeswax food wrap. So we're going to go over how to make your own kind of sustainable food wrap that you would use in place of, like, where anytime you would use some cling wrap or some foil, we're actually going to be using squares of fabric similar to what we've got today, squares of fabric, and we're going to turn them into food wrap. So that one should be a fun project. Again, that will open on the 1st of April. So you can sign up on our website at that time. And I think we are pretty much through. Before we hang up, so to speak, I'm going to do a little shout out. I believe that my own mother and my own grandmother were watching this workshop tonight. So I'm honored that you were able to join. I don't know. I think they might have left, but I'm pretty sure I saw her name in there. So my mom taught me to sew and her mom taught her to sew. So it's very fun for me to be able to share that with them. So thanks everybody for attending, and we will see you for the next workshop.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, since we didn't quite get to sewing on a button in the class, I'm going to show you a quick tutorial for how to sew on a button. Okay, we are going to get started by grabbing a piece of thread. In this case, I'm using 3-ply yarn, so I am separating it, so I just have 1 ply. You're going to need a needle. I'm using a tapestry needle since we're working with yarn. You're going to thread the needle to get started. The only other thing you need to complete this project will be a needle and thread, a button, and some fabric. And to start, you're going to tie an overhand knot towards the end of your thread. I usually tie it twice just to make sure the knot is big enough and it won't slip through the fabric. Since I know that I want my button to be placed right here, I'm going to start by pulling the needle and thread through the wrong side, which is the back of the fabric, and then slipping it through one of the holes in the button. In this tutorial, the button only has 2 holes, so all I have to do is slip the needle through the other buttonhole and back to the wrong side of the fabric, and then repeat. I usually repeat this step about 3 or 4 times, enough so that I feel like the button is nice and secure. The only thing you really want to watch out for is if the button is going to get a lot of use, so in a spot where there's quite a bit of tension, so say like the waistband of some pants, you don't want to sew it too tight. I know it doesn't make logical sense not to sew the button tight, but the tighter you sew it, the more the thread is going to have tension, and there's a possibility that it will break. So you do want to keep that in mind as you're sewing. At this point, you're going to go ahead and tie a knot to secure the stitches in the button. I tied just a regular double knot. You could do an overhand knot or slip your needle through the last stitch and tie a knot that way. Once you trim your tails, you are all set. That button isn't going anywhere. Nice and secure. Okay, now I'm just going to show you real quick what you would do if your button has 4 buttonholes. So it's exactly the same thing, but what you want to do is stitch from the first buttonhole to the one exactly opposite of it. All that you are doing is creating an X. So you just continue to come up from the wrong side, put your needle through the buttonhole, stitch through the hole directly opposite of that buttonhole that you just came up from, and create an X. And you repeat this several times, just as you do a button with 2 holes, until it's nice and secure. And that is how you sew on a button. Not too hard. You could definitely complete this with minimal sewing skills.